Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. It's a pleasure to reconnect again. As you are aware, we, as India Strategic Group and Hammurabi and Salman Partners, we jointly undertake policy and strategic areas of study to strengthen the policy framework across sectors. In this edition of our effort, we have worked on the area of taxation of smokeless tobacco in India. It has many aspects, many stakeholders involved. So we've tried to do a very detailed study, essentially around four crucial aspects. One is, of course, the empower obligations of India under the World Health Organization (WHO) framework concerning tobacco control. Then, of course, the second aspect being the consumption trends of smokeless tobacco in India, health implications of different smokeless tobacco products, and of course, salient features of pertaining to taxation of smokeless tobacco, particularly in the pre and post GST regime that has come in. The study has been undertaken upon convening necessary research into the demographic, medicinal, policy, and legal aspects concerning taxation of tobacco products in India. Based on the findings and discussions, of course, that we have today and the research that we undertaken earlier, the white paper that will, it's almost in the final shape, the white paper that comes out would present the specific recommendations to the Government of India on the best step forward to achieve the empower goals at the same time, handling the stakeholder issues. Before I take the liberty to introduce the panel, the analogy that comes to my mind is about the human rights in business, BHR, which is a very crucial aspect for most parts of the world, including India. And BHR is looked upon very differently, so as much as climate control and so on and so forth. So we have enough issues where the parameters are not uniform, the stakeholder interests are not uniform across jurisdictions, and therefore one size does not fit all. And therefore the need for a very detailed study and understanding the stakeholder interests, and then possibly coming out with recommendations to assist the Government of India in the policy framework around taxation of. We have a very special panel today, and I'm very thankful to the luminaries who have taken out time to contribute their thoughts on such a crucial issue of interest. We have with us Mr. Raghunadha Babu Yadlapati. Mr. Yadlapati is the chairman of the Tobacco Board of India. We also have with us Mr. B.V. Javare Gowda. Mr. Gowda is the president of Federation of All India Farmers Association. We have with us Dr. Priyanka Dixit. Dr. Dixit is the chairperson of Center for Health and Social Sciences with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. We have with us Mr. S.L. Rao. Mr. Rao has a long list of the responsibilities he has held across his career, spanning more than about 50 years. Presently, he's an advisor to the fields of law. We also have with us Mr. Rajesh Malpani, representing one of the important stakeholders, the tobacco manufacturers. He's the secretary of All India Tobacco Manufacturers Association. And of course, we have Dr. Kavita Rao. Dr. Rao is the director of National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Each of our guests today are luminaries, and they have a very illustrious career, which can be spelled out, but for brevity of time, I've kind of limited the introduction to the responsibilities they hold today. And with this, may I now request Mr. B.V. Javare Gowda, President of the Federation of All India Farmers Association, to kindly share his thoughts on taxing smokeless tobacco products in India. Dr. Gowda, over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Manoj, for having given me an opportunity to participate in the deliberations. I am audible, sir?
Yes, of course, loud and clear.
Yeah. Sir, I being the President of the Farmers Federation of India, I represent the major stakeholders in the tobacco industry. Sir, as you know, the major consumption of tobacco is smokeless tobacco, non-FCV tobacco, particularly BD tobacco, amounting to more than 500 million kgs in India. Sir, as you know, the Government of India has enacted a law called Tobacco Board Act in the year 1975 in order to control the tobacco cultivation, production, marketing, etc., etc. So subsequently, the Government of India had a thought to bring all the tobacco in one area under the Tobacco Board Act, but they could not do so for the reasons best known to them. However, the Tobacco Board has introduced a marketing system, that is auction system, in the year 1984. Sir, as you know, the tobacco, FCV tobacco, though Government of India had an intention to bring all tobacco in one umbrella, in spite of the appointment of the committee headed by William, the Secretary, Government of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, but till today we did not see the light of the day to bring the tobacco in one area. Sir, this FCB tobacco, I represent the FCB tobacco. Sir, FCB tobacco, it is a main crop for the livelihood of the tobacco growing area, particularly this cigarette tobacco. Sir, this cigarette tobacco is only 8% out of the total tobacco of production, only 8%. So remaining tobacco is in the form of BD and non-smoking form. But unfortunately, the taxation is pertaining to imposed on 8% of the FCB tobacco, leaving the major portion of other tobacco by non-taxing. Though the FCB tobacco gives more income to the government of India, but I don't know why they have left the other tobacco, particularly BD and non-smoking tobacco. As far as taxation is concerned, as I've already mentioned, the heavy taxation and legislation and control, etc., on the legalized FCB tobacco only. So if all the tobacco is brought to one umbrella, naturally this will lead to the more income to the government, more employment, and more activities among the farmers and other industries. But sir, in spite of taxing the non-smokeless tobacco, the Government of India heavily taxing the FCB tobacco, number one. Number two, the illegal cigarette, which is pouring to India through our borders without any taxation, is amounting to more than 20,000 crores in a year. I'm telling about the cigarette area. Whereas the other area, BD tobacco, the lobby in BD area is more than the other tobacco. They prevail upon the government to destabilize and uncontrol the BD and smokeless tobacco, because they have got more lobby. Whereas FCV tobacco represents the farmer's body. We have no influencing body to make us more happy, to get income and to involve in the industry. Sir, as you know, the subsidy nowadays bringing the taxing FCV tobacco more, government is thinking, may think that smokers will come down. The consumption of tobacco will come down. Sir, it is not done so. Overall consumption of tobacco is getting increased, increasing in the area of smokeless and the BD tobacco area only. Whereas the consumption of cigarette is coming down. In spite of heavy taxation and legislation, income and the government of India is getting more income, whereas they have neglected for the reasons best known to them. So this area should be looked into on priority. Otherwise, the guidelines issued by the WHO should be applied to all type of tobaccos only, not only for FCV. Whatever the guidelines issued by the WHO should be applied to all tobacco, all type of tobaccos. But these guidelines, the government of India and respective governments of the states are concentrating the FCV tobacco, particularly in production, sales, and other area. So this has to be radically changed. Otherwise, the farmers will not be happy. So why we see what sin we have the FCV tobacco growers have done? See, whatever the non-smoking and BD tobacco area growers are expecting the income and the business, we are also farmers. We are also expecting the same. But this time of discrimination between the FCV, that is tobacco, cigarette tobacco and other tobacco should not be there. So this area, even the NGOs also, they always look upon the cigarette aspect only, not other areas. Why this type of discrimination by the government, by the NGOs, and the so-called some agents, vested interest? So this sort of discrimination should be curtailed, and illicit the cigarette, that is contraband cigarette, which is smuggled to India, should be stopped with heavy taxation and legislation. So this indirectly the income of the farmers will go down, and the smoking will not come down. By restricting the legal industry, imposing a lot of legislation on the legal industry, one should not think that smoking habit, the consumption of tobacco will come down. Never. It will never come down. So I appeal to the government of India and the policy framing authorities to look into this aspect and protect the livelihood of FCV tobacco by non-discriminating between FCV and other form of tobacco. This is my view, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gowda. And while we are still on the issue of tobacco, we had shared with you, of course, the draft report on the taxation aspects of smokeless tobacco. Yeah. So I just had a quick question for you before we move on. You are aware that GST and compensation cess at very high levels is already applicable. Yes. Having said that, what is the need for a levying basic excise duty on tobacco products? What is the farmer's perspective? Because is it kind of pushing the interests of the farmers further down by compounding the taxation regime in addition to GST and compensation cess by also levying basic excise duty? What's your thoughts on that? Because farmers are farmers; they're producing tobacco across smoking as well as smokeless tobacco.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So this imposition of excise tax on the farmer should not be there, sir. Number one. Number two, sir, when GST is introduced in the country, so we are really unfortunate. In addition to GST, I think you are aware, all sorts of taxes are imposed on tobacco. Nowadays, calamity tobacco, calamity tax, sin tax, excise tax, VAT, etc., etc. All type of taxes are imposed on tobacco only. So this imposition of excise tax will not encourage the farmers to get the real fruits out of their production, sir, tobacco production.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Gowda, for contributing to the discussion today. And of course, we look forward to your engagement with you through the session over the next 1.5 to 2 hours. May I now request Dr. Priyanka Dixit, Chairperson of the Center for Health and Social Sciences of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, to kindly share your thoughts, ma'am. And I believe you have a presentation as well. We would be delighted to be enlightened by your thoughts broadly on the issues of data points and, of course, taxation on the tobacco side.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, for inviting me this important session and seminar. So I'm Dr. Priyanka Dixit, and hopefully you all can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Assistant Professor in School of Health System Studies at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And when it comes about like tobacco consumption and its evidence, like when we see the sustainable development goal also, so one of the point is that we have to have data. So how we can generate the data, which is actually reliable and validate. So in that line, our institute with where I was also the team member and the co-PI of that project, we have conducted global adult tobacco survey in India. Second round of survey we have conducted, which was the Pan India study, where we have collected information from all the states using the scientific methodology. So our total sample size was around 74,000 people, including men and women. So that survey was conducted in 2016 and 17. And through this survey, we try to capture the important aspect related to the tobacco consumption, different form of tobacco consumption. So I just give us maybe the audience the brief idea about the Global Adult Tobacco Survey. So what is Global Adult Tobacco Survey? It is a nationally representative household survey of all the non-institutionalized men and women, those who are 15 age and above. What is the main purpose of this survey? So our main purpose is to produce national and sub-national estimate of tobacco use, exposure to second-hand smoking, frequency of quit attempts, and also we try to measure the impact of various tobacco control, prevention, and different initiative, maybe at district level and maybe at the national level, how it is going to affect the consumption of various forms of tobacco product. Now in that survey, we have collected, as I have mentioned, we have collected 74,000 people information, which are from all the 30 states from the India. And then we have collected their basic background characteristics. We have asked about their tobacco consumption. In tobacco consumption, if you look at the data, which is in public domain, if you want, probably I can share the link and this one, so that maybe the other people should also try to use that data. And then we have a proper evidence to say that in which state particular government policy is effective, or in which place it is not up to the mark. So we can probably focus on those area. So when it comes to the tobacco's consumption, we have collected various forms, smoking versus smokeless. And also within smoking, we have collected lot of information, like separate information of BD, cigarette, and then water pipe, hookah, e-cigarette. And also in smokeless product, we have a various forms. And what we found that from region to region, from probably the district to district, there people are practicing different form of smokeless product, and they are not aware. Sometimes they are using in form of, let's say, brushing their teeth, and they are not aware that they are using tobacco product. So when we are explaining and asking, then they report, no, they are practicing all these tobacco product they are consuming on daily basis. So in that survey, so one section is about a brief discussion about the tobacco smoking. Then we have a smokeless tobacco. Then we have also tried to assess the cessation, how they have practices and whether their practice was up to what mark it is successful or not successful. Then we have also collected information related to the second-hand smoke, and then their expenditure on this product. Okay, so expenditure. And then also we have information about the media. So when it comes to the media, we have tried to collect information related to the whether they have seen the advertisement in cinema or maybe print media or maybe mass media. And then we have also tried to see that whether they are aware or whether they have seen the warning sign which possibly actually come after POTPA. And then we have asked separate information about the attitude and their knowledge and their perception about danger signs of tobacco product and how it is going to affect their health or maybe the maybe other various forms of the health. So the detailed information we have collected. Now, if you look at specifically in this GETS from Global Tobacco Survey, first round to second round, which we can see probably about 7 to 8 year time period. So we can see about 4.5% decline we can observe in the prevalence of smokeless tobacco product. So earlier it was 25.9% and which was reduced in 2016-17, 21.4%. And we have also estimated the smoking, how much it was declined. So 3.3% around decline was observed from 2009 to 2016 time period. So specifically, if we look at, because as we know that the men, women have the different tendency to use the various forms of tobacco product. So we can observe that at India level, if we look at the smokeless specifically, so among men it was 1.4 and among women it was 0.9. So that was the farmer daily smokers. And if we look at the daily smokeless user at present, so we can see among men 25.1% are using any form of smokeless tobacco, and among women it is 11.1. And this is the major concern. If we look at primary level also and ground level also, like there are various NGOs and organization, we are actually in touch with that. And they are actually trying to see that they are trying to provide some support, but actually they are not getting sufficient support, what I should say, from the government to plan any interventions. So they have shared with us that they have observed that specifically if you look at when it comes to the smokeless product, mainly those who are in the deprived condition, those who are maybe daily wages worker, those maybe who are residing in the poor family, or maybe those who are slum population, rural population, illiterate, they are actually contributing more when it comes to the consumption of smokeless product. And they are not getting any support. They are not getting any support, what we should say. If they are trying to quit smokeless tobacco, we do not have sufficient government, maybe the place or cessation center, which maybe can help them to quit smoking and smokeless product. So I would urge maybe those who are in the position of policy making and planning, they can probably look into this. And also we have observed a lot of gender differences. Gender discrimination is there, that maybe women are consuming, but they're because of the maybe the community and the family's issue, they are not reporting that they are using the smokeless tobacco product. And they are trying to quit, but they are not getting the gender sensitive cessation clinic. So maybe this could be one of the area where maybe policymaker can think of, and then we can try to see that how we can probably achieve our target. So in that line, we have published one paper which was with my student, master student, and it was published in PLOS 1, where we have tried to see that when we are looking at that smoking and smokeless consumption has declined over the period of time. So all this decline, what are the main contributors, whether it is the education which is actually contributing significantly in reducing the smoking and smokeless, or whether it is the message which they are getting, different type of messages, whether which one is actually playing an important role. And it was very surprising. Our finding was the line that it's only about that the poor and rich, and also the education is playing a role, and where we have the information of the whether they have heard any message or the warning sign, how this variable is going to contribute in declining the consumption, it was not coming significant. So though people are aware, 90% population is aware, they are getting message, but still this factor is not playing an important role when it comes to the uh, comes to the declining the maybe consumption of smoking and smokeless product. So maybe we have to again see that how we can try to revise this strategy, and maybe we can make some government can maybe intervene, because nowadays also if we can see the television, we can see there are big celebrity, they are actually promoting the tobacco. Maybe we can say it is a surrogate form. So once the people are actually using without tobacco, they are using pan masala and they are thinking it's okay. They are not using tobacco product. But then in the surrogate form, then they are actually habitual, and then they can convert from smokeless, what I should say, tobacco-free product to with tobacco product. So that may be that the trend we have observed at ground level. So maybe government has to maybe take some initiative and intervention. So in this global adult tobacco survey, we have also tried to capture the various aspects. There are long list of variables through which we try to capture all these aspects, And this is just a one short screen related to the monitor tobacco use and prevention policy. We have calculated various forms of smoking and smokeless product according to the rural urban and according to the gender. And also we have the unit level data. So maybe if researcher or any other policy maker wants any indicator, maybe we are very helpful, maybe we can contribute and we can try to collaborate with them so that we can show the actual evidence, and then we can make a appropriate strategy. So this is the another the data set I would like to share. Like I hope you all are aware that National Family Health Survey round, the 5th round is in public domain, and they have also captured the different form of tobacco product use. Now, if we look at the trend, even from 2016 to 2019, we can see, though some of the places, states, we can see the decline in the tobacco product, but still there are some states like Bihar, Gujarat, especially the Northeast state, where we can see that there is, we can observe the increment, and people are actually, more people are using the different form of smoking and smokeless product. Yes. So I think this is about the maybe the my presentation, and it's open for maybe any question and answer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dixit. If you can unshare your screen. Yes. Thank you so much for the detailed data points on tobacco consumption and the different stakeholders on the consumer side. In fact, I must tell you that the white paper that we have finalized relies quite heavily on your GATS study, and we have cited and we have taken benefit of your in-depth research that you have carried out on this area. Of course, but our focus is on trying to, it's a very wide area and diverse area on tobacco, and there are different perspectives as much as the perspectives of the tobacco growers, tobacco consumers, the segment which does not wish to quit, and of course the segment which wishes to quit, and each of them require policy support and overall environment support. The encouragement, of course, has to be towards meeting the Empower goals. That is our ultimate goalpost to meet the global standards on tobacco consumption and tobacco control. And having said that, on the taxation aspect, particularly, what we have tried to evaluate from the data points that we've taken from your GATT study is, where are we leading with the taxation regime? Are we getting close to the Empower goals? Are we getting close to the consumer interest, both towards avoiding a very high incidence or unduly high incidence of taxation on consumers who wish to consume, and also on the interests of the farmers. And of course, the study would be far more enriched with the discussion today, and we would definitely include submissions on what possible measures can possibly be considered by the lawmakers to also enable the environment for smokers or consumers of smokeless tobacco who wish to quit. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. As we proceed towards the end of the discussion, there might be a few questions. I can already see some in the chat box, which is also available, and would love to hear more from you as we go. May I now request Mr. S.L. Rao. Mr. Rao has a very illustrious career with Terry and, of course, with IMA, and he has headed numerous top-ranking institutions in his career. And presently, Mr. Rao is advising fields of law as an advisor. So over to you to requesting you to share your thoughts on taxation of tobacco.
Thank you, sir. First of all, may I just correct that CV a bit. I was formerly Director General of the National Council of Applied Economic Research, and I was also the first chairman of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Thank you.
Fields of View is an organization with which I'm connected purely on their board. But it is a strategic organization, does a lot of work on strategy. Let me come to the question that we're discussing. And what I'm going to say may be violently in disagreement with many of the things that are being said. First of all, as far as tobacco is concerned, let me confess that almost about 40 years of my life, I was a chain smoker. I switched on to cigars and pipes. I may therefore say that I speak with some authority about the affection for smoking and for tobacco. And I want to add to that it is very clear that tobacco as such is a dangerous product for human beings to consume in any form, whether in chewing or in smoking. And therefore, any taxation that we look at should try to prevent this kind of consumption. I appreciate that my friends from the farming community would be very upset because in my view, we need to cut down the consumption of tobacco, not encourage it. And the only way we have got available to us is taxation. And taxation at two levels. One, at the raw material level, and two, at the finished product level. At the initial level of the product, I think that is much more possible to not only collect, but even to raise that taxation. And we need to do as much as we can, because that makes the raw material expensive for all forms of tobacco consumption. As far as finished products are concerned, I think unless the product is in manufacture in organized sector, as cigarettes are, it's very difficult to catch in the distribution of chewing tobacco or even BDs. And there is not, I don't think there is too much that can be done in terms of taxation, because these are distributed in millions of small scale shops and produced in millions of small scale manufacturing in households and in cottage industries. Having said that, let me just add one or two things in this. As far as I can see, we need, first of all, to discourage the consumption of cigarettes as much as possible, because from all that I have gathered, cigarette consumption is the most dangerous thing as far as human health is concerned. What we can do about that is well known. What we are not doing is also well known. I am afraid that in this country, our whole bureaucracy and taxation system have been to a great extent influenced by vested interests. And the vested interests, obviously, of manufacturing are much greater. And if I may say so, tobacco farmers are great, and they are able to prevent the things that are desirable from happening. Of course, it can be said that this will affect government revenues. Of course, it will. But should government be making revenue at the cost of human health and happiness and life? I don't think so. I think we need to find every possible way to discourage tobacco consumption in every possible form. As far as cigarette consumption is concerned, I think it has been mentioned in the paper also, there is a considerable amount of smuggling that is taking place. Cigarettes are brought in, and I think we should come down with a heavy hand on any cigarettes that are brought in, both by passengers that are coming into India and that are smuggled. We need to punish very severely the smugglers who are caught and try to stop this kind of smuggling from taking place. As far as the finished products are concerned, in other cases, the chewing tobacco, the BDs and other things that are there, they may not be as harmful as the cigarettes from what I've read. But even that needs to be curtailed. We are not going to be able to do that by taxation, because as I said, this is distributed through very, very small, in small quantities in small retail shops. It is manufactured in small quantities in the hundreds or thousands of households and cottage industries, and it's very difficult to catch them. Therefore, the only way you can make it difficult is to make it very expensive. And to make it expensive, the only place where you can catch them, much to the discomfiture of some of my farmer friends, is to tax tobacco at its source from the farmer. When the tobacco comes to market, it should be taxed so heavily that the finished product becomes also very, very expensive. Having said all this, we need to find, in terms of fiscal possibility for the government, other ways of raising revenue than from products that tend to spoil health and even kill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rao, for especially coming from your experience as a consumer of tobacco for a large part of your life, as you shared with us, and therefore a lot of these lessons that we get from you possibly come from your understanding of the implications of consuming tobacco. Having said that, particularly from the perspective of the study we are trying to review on the taxation regime, we have tried to raise some questions for discussion, some questions for thinking. There is no dispute that anything which is not good for human health needs to be discouraged, whether it is alcohol or whether it is tobacco or whether it is any other form of pharmaceutical product, in whichever form, and different degrees of restrictions have been placed based on studies that have brought about data points on the degree of impact on human health, and those are very well known to us across different areas of consumption of these products. And on the other hand itself, fortunately, we have a constitution which gives a right to every citizen that unless something is found to be in a category where it needs to be banned, the government can only place reasonable restrictions. And very well, we have been working around this principle while dealing with different areas of items of consumption. And therefore, the moment something so long and so forth, the government does not come to a view or as a policy that's something which is critical for human health and it needs to be banned. And therefore, till such point, different stakeholders have different rights under the Constitution. And that includes the entire set of people in the value chain, from the very inception level of growers to stakeholders who are involved till it becomes a final product. And that's one segment or multiple segments there. And of course, then the consumers and then, of course, different other stakeholders who contribute to that line of business. So having said that, till we come to a point where such a view is taken, and of course, once such a view is taken, the entire issue goes, and we don't need to even have a taxation regime on tobacco. It can be completely banned, as much as alcohol is treated differently in different states. Once it is banned, there is no question of any taxation on that. And just by increasing or decreasing taxation is an issue to examine, whether what is the implication. And that's where the data points that Dr. Dixit was saying, and something that some issues that we have examined needs considered view and considered contribution. And let me now at this stage request Mr. Rajesh Malpani, is again one of the, as I was explaining, the chain of stakeholders. Mr. Malpani is representing, he represents the case for the tobacco manufacturers in India. And of course, the comparison of smokeless tobacco is an area which I would particularly request him to share his thoughts on, with due respect to, of course, the views so far shared by yourself, Dixit. Report we've relied on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manoj Kumar. It's really great to be on this round table, discussing various issues and hearing various views. What I can see so far from Farmer Federation, Mr. Javare has given some points, and he has very rightly said that illegal cigarettes from outside India and spoiling the market and trade here. Along with illegal cigarette, we also see a lot of duplication in smokeless tobacco products also. So that also needs to be strictly addressed to, as said by L. Rao. Mr. Javare Gowda also said that there should not be any discrimination between smoking and smokeless products. I really see that in white paper, the whole table of pre-GST, post-GST taxation is tabulated. I hope everybody has copy of it. So is it possible to share on screen, or I can just mention the page number?
You want to share on the screen? Feel free.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So when we come to table, I will share it on the screen. And thirdly, he also rightly said that excise and other things, since GST and cess is already there, the NCCD taxation, and for NCCD, some basic excise duty has been introduced that has to be removed. So I really appreciate that view of Mr. Javare Gowda. Dr. Priyanka Dixit has done a lot of work on global adult tobacco survey. This needs to be more authenticated and with more precise data. Like in 2009 survey, when we went across that survey, we saw Delhi population was being shown at around 150,000. 16 lakh only Delhi population. So some correction of data similar with the Haryana figure, that was shown only 12 lakh. So some correct figure will give the picture. But she has also rightly said that smoking tobacco, because of various measures being taken by government, has declined by 4.5% and smoking has declined by 3.3%. So here we see smokeless declining more. And in smokeless tobacco, unfortunately in India, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Dixit, that pan masala and other products, they are also somehow considered as smokeless tobacco product. masala is not at all smokeless tobacco. It is areca nut, usually areca nut product. And areca nut itself has a lot of challenges, like because of the chemical ingredients in it. Areca nut itself is carcinogenic. And other interesting thing that I came across in the white paper is this Dr. Marks and Stern has given a report in his oral maxillofacial pathology. He has written that smokeless tobacco by itself is not carcinogenic. It is the epoxide and the tar that gets generated because of that leads to cancer. But in India, this smokeless tobacco is mixed with areca nut and is chewed. That has raised the question mark in the health field. Because here, Dr. Marks and Stern says that smokeless tobacco history in cancer is coincidental rather than causative. A very bold statement made by him. We also see a lot of other books like that. Here I could come on this book by Dr. Brad Redu. This book is again for smokers only. And he's only advising all the smokers in America. The book is from USA, and he himself is a doctor in one of the renowned college in oral pathology. And he's suggesting that smokeless is 98% safer than smoking. So for smokers, if altogether tobacco can be quit, well and good. But those who are a bit addicted to nicotine, like in smoking, he's advising you better switch to smokeless because it is 98% safer and there is no problem of second-hand smoke and other things with smokeless tobacco. And we see in India, the smokeless tobacco prevalence is more. Overall, in tobacco growing, India is number 2 in the world. But in tobacco-related deaths, it is not in top 10 also in the world. And that is mainly because of sizable exports also. And that is because of smokeless share in the tobacco consumption. Now, if we come to taxation part of it, just share screen.
While Mr. Malpani is trying to share the screen, may I prompt our valuable speakers today to also have a look in the chat box, comments and questions from folks watching us and participating as delegates in the roundtable shared there by a technical. Kindly feel free to take up any issue that you would want to respond to and share your thoughts on it on the inputs and questions in the chat.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, may I come?
Yes, can we allow Mr. Malpani to complete his table and then, sir, can we take up your inputs? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
This first part, I have, sorry for that delay, but this is the table I wanted to show, which is there in the white paper. Now, was the VAT rate. Earlier, there was VAT and excise duty on tobacco products. So this particular table talks about distribution chain, that is after manufacturer, those who are distributing, dealers, resellers, wholesalers. For them, earlier only VAT was applicable. And now it is GST plus cess that is applicable. So for unmanufactured tobacco, the all India, because VAT was different in different states, but all India average is this 16%, and that has gone to 28% GST plus 71% cess. So altogether 99%. So taxation on the dealers has gone up from 16% to 99%, whooping increase of 83% on unmanufactured tobacco, the chain of distributor and dealers. If you see chewing tobacco, all India average was 22.5%, and now it is 28% GST and 160% cess. So altogether it's 188%. So if some dealer is reselling this product on his profits and his expenses, he has to pay 188% tax, which earlier was 22.5% pre-GST regime. So there has been increase of 165.5% in this taxation. If you see filter khaini, it's the same thing. If you see Jarda scented tobacco, most of the smokeless tobacco, the taxes have for manufactured component, it has gone from 22.5 to 188%. Vis-a-vis this, if we see cigarette, it was earlier all India average was 28.70% of VAT, and now it is 28% GST plus 5% cess, because major component of cess in cigarette is on the length. So this length doesn't increase later on, only price goes up because of all dealer margin and other things. So with GST of 28% and cess of 5%, it becomes 33%. So pre-GST it was 28.7, now it is 33%, which is a bit rational. And as Mr. Gowda has said, that there should not be any discrimination. So this discrimination should be somewhere removed, that taxation on other products have gone on significantly compared to cigarette. In BD, all India was 16.65% of VAT earlier, pre-GST, and now it is 28% GST. There is no cess on BD. So the increase there is 11.35%. If you see overall taxation on manufacturer, then unmanufactured tobacco is now taxed at 28% of GST. So from earlier VAT of 16%, now it's 28 plus 71, total 99% tax. So earlier there was excise of 64%. Plus 8.3%, and now there is a VAT. But we see on distribution chain, earlier there was only VAT, and now there is GST plus cess, which is significantly high. If we see chewing tobacco, earlier the taxation was 81% plus 12% of excise and VAT of 22%, which now is 28% GST and 160% cess. This cess is very, very high compared to pre-GST era of excise. Also, there was a compounded duty on smokeless tobacco products earlier based on the machines, and now it's totally ad valorem. And the main thing is that when the tax is ad valorem, and we are seeing high rate of inflation everywhere, the packing cost is going up, the tobacco prices, the labor cost, the price of product goes up, the tax goes up. But fortunately for cigarette, it is mainly specific on length. The major component of cess in cigarette is on length. So it is less, it doesn't get affected with the price increase. So that is what removing discrimination means, that even in smokeless tobacco, similar structure should be there, that it should be specific rate, or everywhere the rate should be ad valorem, either of two. For some tobacco products, it is specific. For some, it is ad valorem. And then inflation, it doesn't go. That's another issue. So what happens in 2-3 years' times? Now, this year there was a discussion pre-budget that in 3 years there has been no rise in taxes of cigarette. So it must go up. And because it is a specific rate of tax. So with inflation, it didn't increase. Only GST component went up, but the cess component, major component of cess, remained same. And when they increase the tax, they increase it across the board. Right now, if you see manufactured chewing tobacco, along with NCCD and tax, it is it is 28% GST, 160% compensation, 25% NCCD. Altogether, that tax rate is going so high that it's almost more than 250% of tax on chewing tobacco. And as rightly said, most of this industry is in, as said by Mr. S.L. Rao, that it is in unorganized sector, in millions of small scale. So high rate of tax doesn't really decrease the consumption, as rightly said by Mr. Gowda. It just shift the customer from legal trade to illegal trade. So there has to be rational tax structure. The tax has to be there. It's the same product, but it should be rational. So somewhere the BD and unmanufactured tobacco should have similar tax, and manufactured tobacco, which is consumed higher class, like cigarette, that and cigarette should have a similar tax structure. This is the plea of our industry, and then same has been advocated by other speakers also, that there should not be any discrimination based on the class of the consumer, the BD, based on the labor, and class of customer. The BD is taxed at a lesser rate. Similarly, unmanufactured tobacco should be taxed similar on the same level, removing discrimination. And manufactured tobacco and cigarette both are consumed in comparatively higher class. So there also some level of discrimination should be removed. That is the industry's plea. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Malpani, can you unshare your screen, please?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Malpani, for presenting the stakeholders' perspective from the manufacturer side. Of course, the twin issues of whether there should be a taxation parity or whether a taxation parity should be avoided because of differential health implications on consumption of the different classes of tobacco. In the present discussion, particularly smokeless and smoking tobacco, is an issue which definitely needs examination. One size does not fit all, and therefore needs to be examined a little more detailed, focusing on stakeholders in each of the segments separately and independently. Consumers who are far less impacted in smokeless tobacco, is there a need to put them at par with consumers of smoking tobacco, where they are exposed to much higher risk of health and mortality? And of course, we're thankful to the efforts of Dr. Dixit and her team on the data points that have been brought about. Of course, at a sample level, but they've been very helpful in trying to develop an analogy and a study which possibly lead some direction to the discussion of the subject. And there are multiple aspects of tobacco consumption, as we've seen so far. And the need for advocacy to reduce consumption is of course a done thing, and that should be a top priority of any governance structure. And having said that, those who do not get influenced by the level of advocacy and therefore want to continue as consumers need to be dealt with based on the nature of tobacco they're consuming and the health implications of that particular tobacco. And we'll of course come back for a rejoinder on views from our speakers. Before I request Mr. Raghunadha, Babu, Yadlapati, I recall Mr. Javare Gowda intervened in the between. Mr. Gowda, would you want to share some thoughts?
Yes, sir. Sir, I would like to ask the questions to Mr. L. Rao. He had made a presentation that the harm is caused to the smokers by non-cigarettes, other form tobacco. See, according to me, in cigarettes, there is a filter Whereas in other form of, particularly in BD, there is no filter at all. Is there any scientific study to submit that the cigarette is more harmful than other form of smoking? And I think he must speak with a supportive document. I have not come across such a scientific study so far. Number one.
Thank you,
Number
sir.
two.
Yes. Please go ahead. Yeah. Please.
Number two, with regard to Rajesh Mildani, he has brought out some American study with regard to, he has shown some journal published from the America. So according to the materials he has shown in the journal, that the smokeless tobacco is comparatively is good than smoking tobacco. So for that also, Mr. Rajesh has to enlighten me with any scientific study which is covered under the American journal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for your question, Mr. Gowda, and of course, giving some breathing time to Mr. Rao and Mr. Malpani to mull over this and come back with a rejoinder on this. May I, in the meanwhile, request just to keep the flow so that we complete the special address and the keynote addresses, and then come back on the rejoinders. May I now request Mr. Raghunadha, Babu, Yadlapati. Sir, you are the chairman of the Tobacco Board and therefore a very crucial piece in the overall environment and the ecosystem concerning the governance of tobacco industry in India. And we would be glad to be enlightened with your views on taxation of tobacco products, particularly on the smokeless tobacco products in India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, for giving me, making me a part of this discussion. Okay, whatever the points that have been raised by Javare Gowda appears to be definitely clearly valid. One such is, I still have a doubt, I have to check out whether cigarettes are only 8%, whereas all other non-cigarette tobacco consumption is 92%. This is abnormally high. It may be right. It's I may not be fully aware, but I have to definitely check out. But this taxation on the higher taxation, very high taxation, abnormally high taxation on cigarettes, on one way, definitely the consumption has little come down, no doubt. But at the same time, it is also giving scope for both illegal manufacture in India and illicit in India and this import, illegal smuggled, leading to smuggling of cigarettes. This is definitely not only loss to the exchequer of the central government, both state governments, and as well to the farmers also in the case of smuggling. Whatever it is, the valid point, another valid point, what Mr. Gowda says that as per the guidelines of WHO, all types of tobacco consumption is harmful. It is not that only cigarette consumption is harmful and others are not that much harmful, not like that. So definitely the government has to keep in an eye to how to reduce the consumption of this tobacco in other areas also. But of course, the taxation, it may not be that easy, that the taxation of those tobaccos be on par with cigarettes. But this discrimination between that FCV and non-FCV or between cigarette and BD, the thought is to be given and that the difference is to be definitely reduced. How it has to be reduced, we will see. And as far as this Priyanka, okay, she has got They have done a elaborated, detailed study with 74,000 samples. It is all good. But she says that in some areas, the cigarette consumption has gone up even in some places, northeast and all. But there, what I feel that because of the increase in population, and of course because of the affordability, increase in incomes, definitely in some areas it might have a little gone up. But on the whole, it has definitely come down. When you look at it in terms of percentage, definitely it is coming down only. That means the intention of the government, the purpose of what is to the entire exercise is broadly by and large fulfilled. Then as far as Mr. Rao is concerned, with his 40 years experience in smoking and all, whatever he says has got more validity. And of course, I do agree that cigarette smoking or tobacco consumption is definitely harmful. There is no second thought of it. But here the one point, this discrimination what Mr. Gowda said earlier. In the case of alcohol, let us say, there is no such differential taxation except for high range and low range. That is there in anyway in cigarettes also. But within alcohol, for example, such discrimination is not there, whereas such discrimination is there here between cigarettes and non-cigarettes. When this is very crucial, anyway, Gowda has objected to that. This smokeless cigarettes are 98% safer. Whatever that report, that has to be thoroughly cross-checked, verified, and it has to be because that definitely such reports definitely lead consumers towards that. So that is to be critically analyzed. So on the whole, overall, to conclude that from my side, a relook. No doubt, this Rajesh Malpani, he said that the percentage of the taxation is increased in the case of non-cigarette, other than cigarette, compared to cigarette. But already cigarette was much higher, so much higher. So whatever little increase in other non-cigarette areas, that is still much lower than this cigarette, tobacco cigarette. So this entire the structure of taxation or this health effect, all these things are to be thoroughly examined while taxing in future, and at the same time this stopping illicit or illegal or that are cigarettes also is very important, because it looks that almost 23% are such cigarettes. So it again not only loss to the income of the governments, but also no, there will be no level playing field, and health conscious also. We don't know what type of material they are using, especially in illegal illicit manufacture in India. So on the whole, your the effort whatever you have made today by bringing in different parties, stakeholders to come together to have to create an opinion or to have an assessment of the overall situation. It is good. Let us take it forward for making the government to take proper decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yadlapati, for sharing your thoughts and sparing time on a Sunday afternoon to spend time with us. And in fact, some of the issues that you rightly brought about is that there are multitude of data points available in all directions, and to make out cases in different propositions. We have in our report tried to collate all the data points available, and if I recall correctly, I think we have relied on this study from the US as well. But apart from that, we've tried to take comprehensive data points from other studies in different jurisdictions, including in India, of course, the GATS survey that Dr. Dixit is mentioning about, and then to evaluate the probabilities of to come to a view of the veracity of some of these data points, whether these are data points which can be relied on at all. And based on that, we've tried to assess the consumption aspects and of course, as you rightly flagged, the comparison between tobacco and alcohol as two areas, and of course, perceptionally they appear to be the same, but within alcohol, largely most of the products have very similar health implications, whereas in the tobacco side, we have found, at least subject, of course, to further examination by the regulators and government and policymakers within the system. What we found was that on the tobacco side, different products have different, very varied health implications, in fact. And while any health implication is bad, and therefore the advocacy has to be very strong to dissuade people from consuming anything which is harmful for health, including tobacco, alcohol, so on and so forth. At the same time, the taxation regime, as our constitution mandates, the taxation regime or restrictions have to be proportionally, in proportion to the level of health implications. Something which is, it could be also a case for soft drinks, for example. We have seen different views on carbonated drinks over the past few decades. There was a time when, we'd seen MNCs being literally asked to leave the country because it is not good for health. And then we have them as a part of the system today in different and a whole variety of products, much beyond the traditional, black and white carbonated drinks that we were used to earlier. So the taxation regime or the regulatory regime or the policy regime has to put restrictions which is in proportion to the level of negative implication a product has, or a harmful implication a product has on the health. And therefore, any aberration of that runs the risk of being flagged as an unreasonable restriction, and therefore violative of some of the rights of different stakeholders, including farmers or manufacturers or consumers, between Article 19 and Article 21, and so on and so forth. And of course, Article 14, where the action of a certain government is not in proportion or does not have a rational nexus to the level of restriction being imposed, the factual metrics. And that these are some of the issues that we try to examine in the report. And we, of course, remain guided by the luminaries and experts leading different stakeholder sets who are there on the screen today. And so, of course, definitely work on checking the veracities and the quality of data points even further, having done that already. But nevertheless, a very, very important issue flagged by you, sir. And may now, before we get into the rejoinders, particularly starting with the cues that Mr. Gowda had flagged for Mr. S.L. Rao and Mr. Rajesh Malpani, may I request Dr. Kavita Rao, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, to kindly share your thoughts, ma'am, on the taxation of smokeless tobacco products, in India? Over to you, ma'am. We cannot hear you, Dr. Rao. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Am
Yes.
I audible now?
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. You've chosen a very thorny topic to put out a white paper on. Whichever way one chooses to opine, it's thorns all around. But still, let's delve into the issue at stake. I'll try and limit my comments to a few of the issues I picked up from your report itself. So the taxation of tobacco, given that tobacco is considered an addictive commodity, and given that therefore people are not rational once they are consuming tobacco in the process of choosing to consume or not to consume. It is sometimes has been argued that high taxes are a way of preventing new consumers from joining the band of consumers, and therefore reducing the long-term consumption of tobacco, as against trying to dissuade consumers who are already consuming today. So that's just a point for a reference. So what is the basic what are the issues when we are talking about taxation of tobacco? We are trying to say that tobacco has a lot of health implications. And we have, you've produced some evidence to suggest that smokeless tobacco is less harmful than smoking tobacco to the extent of the number of organs you can produce cancer in. So that is one dimension. There seems to be some research which suggests that people who are using smokeless tobacco tend to graduate into smoking tobacco. So that's another data point you would want to explore. So my concern at this moment on that dimension is to say that research is very volatile in the space of tobacco. On the health implications of tobacco, there has been evidence of earlier research on tobacco being funded by tobacco companies and hence producing results which are more favorable. So we'll not go into that entire discussion. I'll leave it to your judgment to address it as you seem fit. But high taxes on tobacco run the risk of inducing evasion on one side if they are successful in reducing consumption on the other. So that's one important trade-off that governments have to worry about whenever they're talking about taxation of tobacco. The second issue that your report also flags is, should the tax be of an ad valorem nature or should it be of a specific nature? Now, there are people who have argued in favor of specific taxes because it doesn't vary with how the company chooses to price a commodity. And so it is more, it's a way of ensuring a minimum amount of tax. But with countries like India, where our inflation rate tends to be non-zero, where we have positive rates of inflation, ad valorem taxes tend to provide a better correcting mechanism because we don't revise our specific duties as frequently. And so over time, you switch from being heavily taxed to being not so heavily taxed just by the mere fact that the specific duty was not raised. So that is as an issue of concern. Cigarettes have been historically subjected to specific duties, whereas all other products have been subject to ad valorem duties. And so that mismatch needs to be addressed at some point. Another issue that you raised is there used to be a regime of machine-based taxation for the gamut of smokeless products. And you raised the question of whether we can go back to that regime because it is easier to comply with and therefore yields possibly more revenues to the government and provide certainty and so on and so forth. And so that's the third question that we need to be worrying about. The fourth is a broader question of farmers' livelihood versus health. Now, let me talk a little bit about your table one, and then we'll go on to some of these conversations. So while your table 1 is very cleverly presented, I would suggest that it's a little misleading. Because whenever you're talking about the levy of a tax, you should ultimately be presenting for people how much is the total value of tax on the final consumer, which is what your later tables do produce. So you take a price and tell us how much is the amount of tax built into the price. And that gives you a good point of reference. But if we are trying to say in the value chain, how much is each guy being taxed, the problem is that the GST regime assumes that you pass the tax forward. And tobacco is definitely a commodity where the dealer is not going to bear the taxes, he's going to pass it forward. So then the liability of tax is not a new, and you shouldn't be worrying too much about it. So in that table, I would think it makes more sense to present a joint table 1, table 2 together, which says what is the tax that you are actually going to face on these commodities. And you might still be getting the same result, but it will present a more balanced story. And I would suggest for you to take that into consideration. Let me turn to your suggestion of machine-based taxation within GST. The trouble with the GST kind of structure, or the advantage with the GST kind of structure, is it was set up not to create special regimes for special commodities. And therefore, we don't have the option of saying, let's go back to machine-based taxation. We need to be able to find a way. So we have composition scheme of taxation available within GST, which says that you pay a percentage of your turnover, which is not machine-based, but which does not require to maintain as many books of accounts. But for small dealers, that's really an option available. And that is the best that a GST regime can provide. The Constitution allows the union government to tax tobacco and tobacco products, an excise duty over and above GST. That is how the constitutional assignment of tax powers happened when we were doing GST. It was implicitly assumed that since alcohol and tobacco are considered sin goods, center gets to do the additional taxation on tobacco, where states retain the right to tax alcoholic beverages at rates not in line with GST. So that is the context in which you'll continue to have an excise duty. My suggestion, for whatever it's worth, is to consider suggesting a more regulated regime for wholesale first round sale or procurement of raw tobacco, and putting an excise duty at that point and relieving the cesses and excise duties subsequently as a smarter way to do it, because then you'll get all tobacco products suffering the same levy, the same amount of tax, and then you can do smaller iterations on the products. So that is a suggestion that might yield more traction on how you want to reduce the difference between tobacco versus smokeless tobacco. I'm tempted to be the devil's advocate and say that if we believe that smokeless tobacco is being taxed too much, we should find ways of arguing that smoking tobacco rates should be increased rather than the other way around, if the primary purpose for the country is empower and make sure that we have smaller amounts of taxation. So when we present the case as you're presenting, it is easy to flip it over and say, okay, then why don't we ratchet up the tax on everything else? So I would suggest, I'm not sure if that is a route you really want to go down, but that's by way of, now coming to the trade-off between farmers' livelihoods and health. It's a very tough trade-off to be talking about. And so in principle, you can talk about the revenues being raised from tobacco taxes to be sequestered and creating livelihood opportunities for people who are presently dependent on tobacco as a very profitable method of earning a livelihood. So getting farmers to shift from tobacco to some other commodity is going to be a very big challenge. And if we really want to go down that path, there have to be there have to be plans laid out on how we can aid that transition, without which we can keep wishing for a lot of things, but we are not going to be helping the transition. So those were a few of my comments on the report. I commend you on taking up this really thorny issue. And the only last point I would like to add is is a little thought experiment. Suppose we go on increasing taxes and we believe there's a lot of smuggling happening. Would you expect the smuggled cigarettes to be substantially cheaper than the price that the highly taxed domestic product is being sold at? It's a thought experiment. If it is going to be at that same high price, then even if they are consuming smuggled cigarettes, yes, government loses revenue, but we are achieving the goal of saying cigarettes are very expensive and therefore let's not smoke. So, or let's not consume tobacco. So that is that's a question that I think we need to explore further. It was just by way of a thought experiment. But so yeah. So that's basically my comments on the paper. I don't know if you'll find some of them useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. It was, it was very nice to hear your inputs issue by issue, and we're very thankful that you took out the time to, review the report in such detail and, of course, add value to. And we would definitely we stand we're gaining from your inputs, and we would definitely look into the draft report. The effort has been to as you rightly said, that most research reports in the past have seen the fate of being flagged as reports sponsored by tobacco manufacturers or tobacco sellers. And most cases, the reports have been brought about by people who hardly have the bandwidth to be able to generate and carry out the research, but have produced content tables much beyond their comprehension, and therefore have not been able to stand up and explain and carry out the report in terms of sharing it across stakeholders and, of course, governance regimes. We have, of course, taken up a thorny topic, as you mentioned, and there are thorns all around. And one, of course, it's an area which has direct health implications, which cannot be denied. So whether to increase tax just on the cigarettes and create the differential between products of different health implications, or to reduce, it's a policy call, and we remain guided by the governments of the day. I'll just spend a few minutes, if you allow, before getting into the rejoinders, because it's just fresh in the mind from what we heard from you. On the issue of taxation regime, and particularly the composite tax system that is available under GST. The challenge is that the high taxation incidence for all the justifications that is available today has, in our study, has led to a lot of grey market activity, which is the counterfeit side, even on the smokeless tobacco as much as on smoking. And one of the key areas of concern that we found there, which also was shared by, in some degree by Mr. Yadlapati, is about the quality control on the counterfeit segment, because we, in fact, because of the lack of quality or oversight or quality supervision, we tend to expose a large part of the population to much worse health exposure compared to the segment which is consuming the genuine tobacco and not the counterfeit. So that's a catch-22. But apart from the risk of the implications of counterfeit on the manufacturers, on the earnings, and on the government, on the revenue, the all important piece is also about the consumers who are much worse off, for cigarettes being manufactured in homes and getting packed and sold without any quality supervision. And as much as smokeless tobacco being, pouched or packaged in small cars, and handed over to, and we found all these cases. Even as a lawyer, I remember much earlier cases where raids had to be conducted, where we found manufacturing of pouches of smokeless tobacco undertaken in vehicles. Yes, ma'am. Before I proceed, you had something to add.
Yeah, I see. The thing is, whenever you say the machine-based taxation, it is the machine is mobile. They are these tiny machines. As you said, they can be put in the back of a car. So it requires people to voluntarily comply. It doesn't make it magically happen. And so I'm just worried that if I say, let me give you another thought example. Suppose I reduce the we raise the taxes very high and we reduce the consumption of tobacco in young people. And the other hand, there are fewer people who are consuming illicit tobacco. Should we then start talking about the trade-off between these two? Dangerous territory we are entering into when we start saying those things. So I'm just saying that we need to start imagining beyond the limitations of saying, should we have more tax? Should we have less tax? It is a conversation which has to go much beyond the simple realm of taxation. That's my limited observation.
Very rightly put, ma'am. And of course, the one piece, in fact, at an earlier point in time, we had also worked on a paper on counterfeit for smoking tobacco for, to examine some aspects there. And that remains true here as well. So counterfeit definitely needs an independent thinking, irrespective of which product line the counterfeit is happening. And therefore, counterfeit has to be addressed not just as a section in the Indian Penal Code or here and there, but the kind of implications counterfeit has, particularly for consumable items, whether it's a regular consumable item or tobacco or alcohol or anywhere, the lack of oversight on quality, brings importance of regulating or controlling counterfeit to the fore, ma'am, and completely with you on that. And therefore, these are also some measures that alongside that we've tried to evaluate. And the other last point, of course, and thankfully, the comparative of table 1 and table 2 that you flagged, of course, the report leads to table 2, but as you rightly said, a more comprehensive picture should be presented so that it looks more transparent, and which is the intention, and we would definitely work on that to consolidate the two and put up the larger picture front itself. And thank you so much for taking out your time as well on a Sunday for such a thorny topic and area, and sharing time with us. We have about 15-20 minutes more to go, and I see a lot of questions and comments in the chat box, and I would request our valued speakers to pick up from there anything that you want to respond to. And of course, I would like to start with what Mr. Gowda had flagged, the two issues for a rejoinder and a feedback. Firstly, from Mr. S.L. Rao on the comparatives between cigarettes and BDs and the levels of health implications. Mr. Gowda, would you want to repeat the question once, just for the benefit of...
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, Mr. Rao said, I don't know the basis of his submission, whether he has any support of scientific report or not. I want to know clearly, the cigarette is safer, FCB, non-cigarettes are safer than the cigarette smoking. What is the basis for that? I want to know it. Number one. As far as Rajesh is concerned, he has read out some points in the journal, American journal, that the consumption of non-tobacco, non-cigarettes, smoke, I mean, chewing tobacco and other aspect of tobacco is safer than smoking the cigarettes. That is also not clear. I want to have a clear study on it. I mean, point on it.
Thank you so much. Can we start with Mr. S.L. Rao? So would you want to give a pushback?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll be very brief. First of all, I want to congratulate Dr. Kavita Rao for an absolutely first-rate, comprehensive exposition, which answers all the questions that all of us have raised during the discussions. Secondly, I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning when I spoke. First of all, I think tobacco itself is by itself a dangerous product, a harmful product. And therefore, while it is of tremendous remuneration to the farmers and it is of great revenue raising ability for the government, its usage has to be discouraged. And the only way we can do that is by taxation. And therefore, I want to reiterate that as much as possible, it should be taxed, irrespective of what Mr. Gowda might say about the harm to farmers and so on. And I think Dr. Kavita has responded quite well by talking about doing things with the revenue, which will help these farmers who are affected to do other things, which will compensate them. Secondly, I think it is essential, to respond to the question that Mr. Gowda raised. I'm amazed that Mr. Gowda raised the question as to whether cigarette smoking is harmful and more harmful than others. I'm not a medical man. I'm not a medical research man. But whatever I've read over the years has told me very, very clearly that cigarette smoking is extremely harmful to health for various reasons, the paper and whatever else. And I think it is essential, sir, that your report must have a chapter which does a good comparison of the health effects of each of the products that have been mentioned, that have been discussed, whether smokeless or smoking products. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rao. And of course, from your illustrious career and huge sea of experience spanning over more than half a century, you would be, of course, aware that these kind of questions are very natural when we have a multitude of stakeholders together on the table. And of course, we are there to question each other's propositions and then also get convinced or convince the other. And whatever you said from your long experience as a consumer of tobacco, of course, we take it that it comes firsthand, and also from the research that you would have done and read up across different data points available. As far as our report is concerned, sir, our research, we have in fact dedicated a very substantial section in the report on the health implications of different categories of tobacco products, because that naturally makes the very foundation for a case whether a universal or an equal or there should be parity on taxation across different segments of tobacco products, or is there a case for a differential treatment, keeping in view the mandates of the Constitution under 19 and 21 and 14, of course, as a government to explain. And so we have, in fact, dedicated and given quite a relevant importance to the health implications. Having said that, sir, I would personally be glad to receive your inputs on any further addition on expanding the scope of the health implications the way we have covered, and I'll remain guided by you, sir. We value your inputs and your experience as a thinker, and definitely, and I hope this answers the question raised by Mr. Gowda. May I request Mr. Rajesh Malpani to kindly revert, give a rejoinder to Mr. Gowda.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj Kumar. Mr. Gowda has raised a question that what is the basis for smoking versus smokeless harm comparison. One I could say was this GATS that has been referred by Dr. Dixit and others also. That GATS survey of 2016-17 says tobacco causes total 1.3 million deaths in India. Out of this, 1 million deaths are caused due to smoking. That data is also available. This is despite the fact that smoking is only in 10.7% of adult population and smokeless is in 21.4% of adult population. These are the GATS figure. So if you see the percentage wise, smoking percentage is less, but the deaths are much more. So smoking and smokeless comparison can be inferred from GATS. Even the IARC monograph of 1989, there is a myth that tobacco contains 28, smokeless tobacco contains 28 carcinogens. But in smokeless tobacco, this IARC monogram says that there are only 11, and out of this, only for 5 there is no evidence at all. That only 6 are there and not 28 as mentioned. So, as other speakers were saying, Mr. Rao, that there has to be a proper risk index of various tobacco products, and accordingly the taxation also should vary rather than keeping it at par across the board. So some kind of risk index, as Raghunadha Babu were saying, that cigarette was already taxed quite high than smokeless tobacco, but that is not the truth. If you see the exact tax percentage, because on tobacco, on cigarette, the tax is specific. The percentage terms, you have to go to market, see the MRP, and then only you can work out the tax of that particular product. But smokeless tobacco, especially manufactured chewing tobacco, all those flavored chewing tobacco are taxed much higher than cigarette. Even prior to GST, it was higher. Now, distribution chain is taxed very heavily. Tax has gone up by as much as 500% for distribution chain. As Kavita Rao was explaining, that compounded machine-based duty structure is not possible in GST. For cigarette, they have worked out a specific length-based tax, which is a specific tax. Similarly, there should be some kind of mechanism to have tax only at the level of manufacturer and at the level of pre-GST era. The same kind of tax structure only on manufacturer, because distributors are n in numbers, and recovering this added cess and GST from the total chain is quite impossible. Rao also explained that composition scheme is there, but composition scheme is not there for tobacco products. Tobacco products has been kept out of composition, which is a good in a way that unnecessarily people should not evade tax under the name of composition, or they show less turnover and do much more turnover in that composition. So it is good that composition scheme is not there, but the tax structure should be such that cigarette, just like cigarette, the GST should be on manufacturer and the chain, but the cess should be only on manufacturer and not on the chain. It was also told by Rao that if smokeless is taxed higher, smoking tax should go up, overall tax should go up, because that will only reduce the consumption. But what is happening is that as the tax rate is going up, the tobacco consumption, as told by Mr. Gowda, won't come down. It is only legal trade that is suffering. Legal consumption is coming down. Illegal consumption, counterfeit products, duplicate products, and all these things are going up and up, and mainly in unorganized sector like smokeless tobacco and BD, etc. Because high rate of tax is only killing legal trade. It is not reducing tobacco consumption, but killing legal trade. So the tax should be such rational tax structure always increases the tax, increases the compliance, and promotes the legal trade.
Tell me.
I want to say, sir.
Thank
Hello?
you so much, Mr.
Sir,
Malpani.
can I add one more point, sir?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Sir, increase in taxes naturally leads to the switching over to cheaper variety of consumption by the smokers. So I want to know the opinion of panelists on my point. High taxation leads to switching over the consumption, tobacco consumption to the cheaper variety of tobacco. It is happening in India.
Sure. Thank you so much for your question, Mr. Gowda. We have about 10, 12 more minutes to close the panel. May I request, of course, your rejoinder to your the issue you flagged just now would also come as a part of that. May I request our valued speakers to kindly share their final comments and inputs, having heard everybody else, and to sum up, because I could see a lot of discussion in the chat box across the panel, there. And of course, I would like to also inform that Dr. Kavita Rao had to leave a few minutes ago. In fact, she had indicated that she had some engagement around this time, and therefore, having shared a very in-depth thoughts and pointers from a very detailed study of the report, she has stepped out, and we would continue to close the panel with our colleagues here on the screen. May I request Mr. Javare Gowda, to start with you. I mean, apart from the question, is there any other issues you want to flag or respond to? And I would, of course, follow the same sequence.
Thank you very much for the good platform you have provided us to share our feelings and the thoughts and the opinion and the criticism also. I would like to have this type of a platform to have interaction permanently, particularly from the farmers' perspectives. Because we being the major stakeholders, see Article 17, 18 of the FCTC guidelines always says, unless the respective governments provide an alternative viable income crop, any government should not think of banning the entire tobacco. This is the article of FCTC, say 17, 18, clearly says.
In fact, thank you for bringing that up again. If you recall, Dr. Rao also kind of tossed the issue between considering reduction of taxation versus creating enabling environment for farmers to transition, or as you said, to have alternative means of migrating to other areas of cultivation. And as you are aware, these are very complex issues, because cultivation of products is dependent on various factors, including the climate and soil quality, and the kind of crops that can be produced in different parts of the country. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And of course, I would request pushback on the question you raised a few minutes ago as well. And with this, may I request Dr. Dixit, Priyanka Dixit, to kindly give your thoughts or rejoinders or any pushback, having heard all the others.
May I be excused? Thank you.
Sir, thank you so much for joining us today. I was just going to come to you next.
Wonderful discussion. And I think it needs that there are obviously issues that have been raised which need a lot more further examination.
Sure. So before you go, sir, any particular thoughts you have? We could jump the queue and request you to
raised. One is the whole question of agriculture and what happens to tobacco farmers and how can we compensate them. The second question is the relative effect of different tobacco products on health. And therefore, third, for the first time and probably the first time, we are looking at a taxation system which is related to health effects. And that's very unusual, but very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining in, sir. And we would, of course, continue to be guided by you. Going forward, we'll connect with you as well. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, in fact, Mr. Rao had also indicated earlier that he would join in only for the first hour because of his commitments and other things in his day-to-day requirements. But I'm very thankful that he continued on with us all this while, nearly to the fag end of the discussion. Coming back to you, Dr. Priyanka Dixit, may I request you to share your thoughts, your pushbacks, your rejoinders, and please feel free, ma'am. Yeah.
So just I wanted to clarify one thing, like as Dr. Rajesh has mentioned. So this gets data, we can only check the prevalence. We have not collected information related to what are the health implications. Though we have collected information about knowledge, attitude, and perception, but we, with the help of GETS, we are not in a position to say that how much is the consumption in a particular state and how much mortality or maybe the health outcome we can observe. So as Dr. S.L. Rao sir has suggested, I would also request you to maybe in that chapter where you are trying to see what are the different consumption of tobacco product and how it is going to affect. Probably you all can do a meta-analysis and systematic review. Then you are in a position to collect the information. Maybe different states, people have conducted a study and they have shown a different estimate. So to show the combined effect, I would request that you can go with a meta-analysis and systematic review, and then you can prove what is the effect of the smoking product versus a smokeless product on different health outcomes. That would be innovative contribution of your white paper. With that, I really thank you and I enjoyed this session a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And of course, we'll try to enhance the quality of the data points to the best of our abilities. Of course, as a think tank and also as a law firm collaborating together, our effort is to rely more on data points of the likes of yourselves and similar organizations. Build up our analysis based on that. Of course, it's our endeavor as far as possible. We'll try to enhance even primary data points within our limited resources, but we value your research and research of similar organizations far more valuable because you are in the social sciences space and undertaking projects on direct connect with the stakeholders at the ground level in different sectors and different spaces, and but we'll definitely try to strengthen our report based on your inputs, ma'am. Thank you so much for being here with us. And before requesting Mr. Yadlapati, may I request Mr. Rajesh Malpani for any thoughts or pushback or closing remarks?
Thank you, sir. More specific data, as Dr. Dixit and Mr. Rao both have said, Mrs. Rao, that even one NGO I was discussing, and they tried to collect the data from some cancer hospitals. But in the data sheet, in the patient's information form, it's only a question, do you use tobacco in any form? If they have a specific data-wise analysis that this is smoking tobacco, smokeless, and within smokeless also, is it a product or exclusive smoke? If some kind of data can be collected based on a precise analysis, that will be really appreciated, because right now, no such analysis we could find. And secondly, already I think government is moving in that line, that some government companies have heavy investment in cigarette companies. And obviously, then the view of government may differ from one industry, other industry. They have their own heavy investments in such companies. So they are, I think, gradually disinvesting that portion. That is the news I have read somewhere, so that they can look all the industry with same. That's it. Thank you so much for this nice deliberation and contribution by all the panelists on the table.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Malpani. And I just want to join issues with you on the last part of your remark about conflict of interest by the on the part of the government. I think, fortunately, in our experience as a think tank, we are now more than 25 years old. In our understanding and what we've seen over the past decade or so, I think the levels of conflict of interest have almost minimized, and there's a deliberate effort to keep the buckets of government as a entrepreneur or a business independent from government as a governance institution for governance. And as you've rightly said, both should be kept separate, and conflict of interest should be minimized. In our sense, of course, there's a very deliberate effort on the dispensation of the day. And if there are areas where there is such a conflict of interest, we would be glad to take up the issues, because we are sure that the perception and the wisdom is that such a conflict should not exist. And that is why we've seen increasing levels of disinvestment and more autonomous status to public sector undertakings, which also means that lesser control of the government, and to let them compete in the market as a level playing field. And we would be glad to receive your inputs on such instances where you see a conflict, and we would be glad to take up those issues as well as part of the study or alongside this separately. Coming to Mr. Yadlapati, thank you so much for, of course, joining us today, and we're very happy to have you, and we've gained immensely from you, sir, today. And yes, sir.
I want to add one point.
Yes, that is exactly what I was going to request you just now, that your thoughts and inputs and closing remarks are for you.
You are concluding.
So, no, not at all, sir. I was just going to invite you to give your concluding remarks. Sir, you need to keep the microphone closer to you. We can hear you very barely. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
See, one thing, there is unanimity, number one, on reduction of usage of tobacco by whatever way, whether it is cigarette or otherwise. Unanimity among all the panelists. Number two, there is unanimity again on curtailing the illicit smuggled cigarettes. On this point also, everybody is of the same opinion. The only point is where the differentiation, discrimination, what Mr. Gowda has raised. As far as tobacco is concerned, slowly, it is not just by taxation, otherwise also by awareness created, the consumption is coming down. It has to further go down also. But since there is a scope for export, whatever export, that remains. Unfortunately, my worry is the other alternative, like nowadays, this contraband like Ganza and those certain other, they are more dangerous. I don't say that they are substitutes to cigarettes, but it's a fact that their situation is alarming on that front. Anyway, that is a different subject. As far as taxing the tobacco at farmer level or at production level, as suggested by Dr. Kavita Rao, I don't think it is possible, feasible, because earlier it used to be. After dispensation, farmers got relieved very much. So that idea also, in my personal view, is not a workable idea. But anyway, on the whole, the entire subject has been discussed in detail. Different perceptions we heard from each corner. And holistic, detailed, in-depth discussion is to be taken place between this taxation part between the among the different categories like cigarettes, smokeless cigarettes, BDs or chewing or whatnot. Some detailed in-depth study is to be done and decide on the future taxation. Thank you for the initiation taken by you on this in this regard.
Thank you so much, sir. You've made my life so much easy with the concluding remarks for summarizing the suggestions and inputs of all the panelists and valued speakers today, valued guests today. I think we are across the line on our time budget for today, and we have of course had a immense amount of participation from our delegates, very active chat box, and they've given their inputs, and we've tried to roll over the issues there in our discussions. And of course, may I now thank all our guests today for joining us, sparing their time on a Sunday. Mr. Raghunadha, Babu, Yadlapati, Chairman, Tobacco Board of India, Dr. Priyanka Dixit, and Mr. BV Javare Gowda, President, Federation, All India Farmers Association. Dr. Dixit, of course, the Chairperson of Center for Health and Social Sciences at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Mr. S.L. Rao, amongst and in addition to the multitude of introductions that he also shared with us, is also the advisor to the fields of law, fields of view. Mr. Rajesh Malpani, Secretary of All India Tobacco Manufacturers Association, and of course Dr. Kavita Rao, Director, National Institute of. Thank you all for joining us today and enriching our understanding of the research that we have done thus far, and in the process of finalizing our report. We stand immensely rich from your inputs, and we would of course incorporate those, as well as incorporate a summary of our discussions today, so that the policymakers can gain first-hand from your participation in the discussion today. Thank you so much, and have a good day. Have a good Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all of you.